Hello, everybody. Welcome to Radio Sofia. Radio Sofia is an online platform to host discussions, talks, movie and book reviews on various socio-economic and political issues. And the platform intends to bring academicians and non-academicians together on one platform for a dialogue and to educate each other. And today we have a very special guest with us to discuss about race and sexuality and his experiences in America and outside. It's a great pleasure to introduce you all to Mr. Christopher Murphy. So Chris is an expat living in Munich, Germany, where he currently works as a patent paralegal. He holds a degree in Chinese language and culture from Michigan State University, as well as a Master's of Law with focus on US-China immigration frameworks from the Yenching Academy of Peking University. Chris has a strong interest in US foreign policy and hopes to make use of his linguistic and interpersonal talents to bridge gaps between the US and Asia. And as a little hobby aside, Chris is also a YouTuber and runs a channel by his name, Christopher Murphy. And without any further ado, hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
So,
it's been a long time.
I'm good. Yeah, long time. So, should I wish you ni hao?
Ni
Should I wish you
hao.
hi? Yeah. Ni hao.
You
And
remember?
yeah, of course I remember. And I also remember that you speak a lot of languages. How many
Yeah.
languages do you speak?
So, including my broken German, as I now live in Germany, I speak 6.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So it's English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, now some German.
Oh, wow.
And I still remember Naperu Chris, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
Telugu.
Naperu Chris, it's in Telugu. Wow. You have a great memory power. Great memory.
So I do remember that when I visited.
Lovely. Okay, Chris, so you're born in America, and for how long have you lived in America?
So I lived in America up until I was about 19, but I did during my high school. I took 1 year off and I moved to Mexico for a year to do an exchange. And then I went to China immediately at the age of 19, and I stayed there until I was 26. And then there I did my master's and study abroad. And then now I currently live in Germany. So I basically spent practically all of my 20s outside of America.
Oh, so is your family now still in America, or are they living with you?
Yeah, so they're still in America at the moment. And actually in some problematic areas, I have family in Minneapolis where like the basically race war is going on right now. There's a lot of protests because of, the murder and, horrible murder of George Floyd. And I also have family that's living in Detroit. I say hotspot right now because these areas have been hit really badly by COVID-19.
Oh my God, I hope they're all safe physically.
Yeah, they are, thank God.
Yeah. So I'm glad for them. Chris, then today I would like to ask you some very important questions, and I want to introduce to our listeners about the idea of race and the ongoing race war and ideas of sexuality and how was your experiences while you were living in America and abroad. All right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've been to different parts of the world, as I understand. So when you are outside of America, how do you identify yourself?
So it's very interesting that you asked this question because I think, and I've said this actually in one of my YouTube videos, that identity itself is very complex when you're in a country that's predominantly white, or if you're from a country that's predominantly white. Because essentially, I grew up in a predominantly white area. I'm from Michigan originally. And I think my identity was basically given to me by my teachers who were all white. And I think that's problematic because in the United States, like we rarely talk about, for example, the genocide of, Native Americans. We very talk about why we have things called Chinatown, for example, and all these things. So it's like basically you stand up and you say, you pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, and we sing the national anthem. But we never really have discussions about what it means to be American. And then I think when you're in predominantly white communities, it's really hard for you to express yourself. So as a Black person, for example, that's my situation. So when I went abroad, people would always ask me like where I'm from, particularly in Latin America. Everybody would think I was from Brazil or from XYZ or Cuba. Nobody would think I was from America. When I was in China, people would automatically think I was African because like in America, when they think of America, you think of white people, you think of Hollywood, you don't think of of like, me, but they have forgotten that Barack Obama was our president at the time. So I think when I
Right.
was forced to be in these places where people were constantly making me think about my identity because they didn't necessarily see me in the whole notion of being American, because like we only make up 13% of the population. I,
Right.
as abroad, I feel like now I can say I'm American, but I also would say I'm African. I've encountered the diaspora, and I think they have given me a source of like confidence in my roots, which I could not celebrate in the States.
Right. In fact, when you have visited India as well,
Hmm.
I remember when you were walking on the streets along with us, there were some people who were looking at you, and then you asked me, why are they looking at me? Then I said, maybe because we look different. Then you said, why? Don't we look alike? I remember the
Yeah.
question very much because then the difference of color between brown, black, white, I think
Right.
it's very much ingrained in us, and how people perceive us
Hmm.
might be very different
Exactly.
from how we
Hmm.
perceive ourselves, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think when I was in India, I actually was quite afraid when I went to India because I was worried that people would want to attack me. In all honesty, because when I was online and I saw that, Nigerians and other Africans are having a hard time. We're having a hard
Right.
time, and so when people would look at me, I didn't want to become a target. But everybody was really nice to me, and they wiggled their head and was like hi. So it was really
Right,
nice. I really
right,
liked it.
right.
Yeah, so people were very,
I,
very friendly to me.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that you had that fear. You had to have the fear when you visited India. But yeah, I think you had pretty good experiences. People were clicking selfies with you, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly.
Exactly.
Right,
It was fun.
right. Growing up in school and when you were in college, so how was the general interaction between white, black, and brown children? Or how do you see that experience? Is it like very positive or negative? Because I'm asking this question only to
Hmm.
get a feeling as a non-American living outside America,
Hmm.
just to understand the situation of how do you experience uh, race? Like how do students there, children living there, because now there they know that you're American. All of them know you're an American, right? All are
Hmm.
American children of different color.
Right.
So how was the experience there in school, in college?
That's such a good question. And I think it's interesting because when you go to college, excuse me, high school, it's like there is almost no room. And I think this will change now, but when I was in high school, privilege is something that I think high schoolers have a hard time. Like this notion of privilege, like it's just a concept and it's an occurrence that I think high schoolers have a hard time engaging with on such an
Mm-hmm.
intellectual level because you would just look at someone like, hey, we go to school together. There are a lot of idiosyncratic, things about our country. Again, this comes
Mm-hmm.
with this notion of like American identity, and in your predominantly white area with white professors, when you talk to someone that's a person of color who doesn't fit the stereotype of being like, horribly poor, they speak poor English, or they have, their fathers are not in their family, you know what I mean? Just these horrible stereotypes. So for me, in my case,
Mm-hmm.
my parents are originally from Detroit, Michigan. They come from pretty not bad areas, but like it's part of like they come from some areas that there's crime in, right? And so
Right.
for my sister, they raised
Mm-hmm.
us in a different city because they wanted us to have a better education, and they always raised us, Chris, you need to speak proper English. You need to do all this stuff because you already have these cards against you, so you need to speak really well. And every time, because we also wanted to engage with Black culture, but every time we tried
Right.
to embrace it, my dad, because he's from like the
Mm-hmm.
ghetto of Detroit, and he would be like, you weren't raised there. Why are you speaking like that? Why are you behaving like that? So this is how my sister and I were raised. So when we went to school, white
Mm-hmm.
kids would say, "Oh my God, you're the whitest Black person I've ever met." Now, at the
Okay.
time, I had thought that was an accomplishment. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
oh, but now looking back on it, that's actually horrible. Like the notion that to be educated, you can only be white. Now, I honestly think this is just like ignorant, like
Right.
interactions from people. But,
Mm-hmm.
I think if I can't even explain it. Looking back on it now, that it was such a
Sure.
long time ago. But
Right.
um, but for
Right.
students, definitely, it's it's a crazy experience. It can be. Professors, for example, they're not as prone to proactively pursue Black history. So I think a lot of people don't know about Black history in the States, and like it wasn't on the agenda in my school to really focus on Black history, which is also problematic. So I really do think there is an agenda in our education system that needs to be changed to obviously cater to make America more of an inclusive country as it's meant to be.
Right. That's very interesting to know. I mean, we are hearing about the horrible incident of Floyd's death, and also earlier there was this viral video of Amy Cooper, and
Yes.
and there's a lot of discussion about Black deaths, and so we living outside America, we hear these news, and I thought now when you said that people even in America are not aware of the Black history, I'm surprised. Because I would assume that people, at least in America, would have a basic awareness of what it was, what the history was, what the culture was, and how the situations have evolved over centuries. But, I'm surprised that you said this thing. So what do you think have led to these incidents? Is it that kind of an ignorance of not knowing the situation of Black economic, political, social situation of Blacks? Like, do white people do not know, or what is it? What do you think are the situations that have led to or culminated in many Black deaths, including Floyd's death?
So that is I love your questions. I think
Thank
that's
you.
a very beautiful question, and I'm actually really happy to answer it. So allow me to clarify. It's not that whites don't know history. I also should say that Black people, in most cases, we don't know our own history, because I think it's an agenda. I think that's a way to divide and conquer. If you don't shine light into the darkest pit of your history, people don't know it exists. So it's really difficult for people to resonate with why the United States still is systematically racist as well. Like, slavery still exists, but in a more systematic form. So basically, there's in America, we have something called Black History Month. And basically that's 1 month we get out of the year where we talk about Black history. Now, obviously, we have those figures who are Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, we have Malcolm X, like these very like prominent figures in our society. But we don't talk about, for example, the person who created peanut butter was actually a Black person, right? George Washington Carter. We don't talk about that. You know what I mean? That wasn't a Black achievement. So basically, I just think when we think about supremacy, and when we think about, like, in the 21st century, why cases like George Flynn and Amy Cooper happen, is because there has been obviously racism has taken a new form. It's more systematic than it is direct. So it's more covert. It's more covert racism versus overt. So obviously KKK, lynching, using the N-word, all that stuff is inappropriate. But when you look at it systematically, like what's underneath the tip of that iceberg, which shows you like socially unacceptable, interactions with Black people as killing us and, segregating us, and directly to our faces, rejecting us for career opportunities because of the color of skin. Underneath all that, you have secretive discrimination. You have, basically people using the phrase all lives matter, which is problematic in this moment. You know what I mean? I could go on and on, like, for days about it. But I really do think that we need to look at basically underneath the tip of the iceberg, which is covert white supremacy that has become socially acceptable. So like I said, color blindness, people say, I don't believe in color, calling the the police on Black people, which is Amy Cooper, that's a perfect example, and using her privilege to get, what she wants. And we've seen it, you know what I mean? And for example, English only initiatives, for example, people going around saying you must only speak English in this country. I want to remind people that the United States doesn't even have an official language. I mean, cultural appropriation, anti-immigration policy, tokenism, you know what I mean? Claiming reverse racism. We have things like, oh, you're so articulate, which is really problematic because I'm a native speaker. I come from America. Why is it an accomplishment that I speak proper English? So these things, I feel like, contribute directly to the top of the iceberg, which is direct like murdering and killing of Black people. And I think if we want to address the situation, first we need to attack the country systematically. The country was built for white privileged Republican men, and I think that's why it was so easy for Donald Trump to take the White House. And until the country caters to everybody, this is not going to stop. It's not. It will not stop. And I think now we need to stop focusing only on, okay, yes, lynching doesn't happen anymore. We completely are against hate crimes, blackface, the N-word, swastikas, neo-Nazis, burning crosses, racist jokes, racist slurs, the KKK. But we also need to problematize why we are so adamant about all lives matter initiatives. Why are we so adamant about protecting like people who deny white privilege? I mean, that's the next step.
Right. Okay, wow. You've given a wonderful and elaborate answer for making us to look into the deeper aspects of the issue. Thank you for that. And so then how true is this narrative that still that most Blacks have to constantly watch out for themselves from all these police attacks or discrimination by white people?
That is 100% true. And the thing is it doesn't matter if you're Barack Obama or if you're a Black person who lives in the ghetto somewhere in Detroit or Harlem. At the end of the day, and I want to kind of concretize it into realistic terms. So, someone going for a run during times of COVID-19. My father, for example, my father doesn't have adequate access to healthcare. So basically they have to make their own masks. And there's so many Black people who are so afraid because obviously right now you need to cover your face. There's so many Black people who are afraid of covering their faces because you look like a criminal and that can provoke the need to kill amongst many in the majority community. So on the one hand, I think COVID-19 has exacerbated the already present fears in us. And so, for example, me living here in Germany, I don't have to worry about going out. I mean, when I go out every day and exercise, I am dressed completely in black. I have black shoes, black leggings, black sweater, black hat, black headphones, and I am 100% okay. And I can run literally at 2 o'clock in the morning and I will be fine. I would hesitate to do that if I were in the United States. And it doesn't matter what part of the socioeconomic strata you belong to, you have to, as a Black person in the United States, look out because you have to be sensitive to the fears within the majority community. You're going to be associated with thugs, criminal activity. They don't care how many degrees you have. If you don't have a felony, you know what I mean? It's annoying. It's actually very annoying, and it's oh my God, it's actually I wouldn't say it's very surprising to me, but to know that I thought the degree or the extent of it would have come down because given the kind of movements that we're seeing that are happening, given the kind of awareness or, like with Obama becoming the president, even aftermath, then I thought at least there would be some sort of awareness or the extent and degree of this would have come down. So just now that we're on this topic, recently I watched a series called This Is Us. And there's this one scene where one of the characters, Randall, and his father, William, comes to the street and he's just taking a walk on the street. And immediately the white neighbors alert the police and the police come because he's spotted in that area for the first time. Nobody knows who he is. And so immediately police are there, and then the police literally apologize to Randall later, saying sorry, and the neighbors also apologize, saying, "Oh, we did not know that he's with you," and even Randall end up apologizing. Okay, it's okay, sorry, and then he tells his father, "You can't walk around like this," etc. He tends to apologize to white people because he's raised in the white family, etc. So, and then now what you said, I feel it's not, I thought maybe the series is exaggerating or maybe the series is just picking one of an instance. But the way you are stating, it looks like that is the fact of the life. It's for most Black Americans, my goodness. And you know what? It's crazy, Kranti, when you think about it, because if you honestly take a step back as an outsider, for example, I know you visited America before, right? I think you've been
No, I never did.
Right. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
you, someone who as an like expat, for example, you go to the United States on vacation. If
Mm-hmm.
you were to look at the
Mm-hmm.
situation, I
Mm-hmm.
think that you would probably say, wait, you called the police on him for being a citizen walking legally on the road of a country that belongs to a city, state, country that he has the right to be in.
Absolutely.
If you think about it, like he's not an undocumented immigrant. He
Mm-hmm.
has the right to walk anywhere in on any like in any of the 50 states and in the
Absolutely.
territories that he wants. What gives you the right to call the police on him for practicing his American right of walking freely in his country? Like, how is that even a thing?
Absolutely. I
It's
mean,
ridiculous.
right. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, if a white man walks in a black neighborhood, will the police be called?
No, okay, so I have to say this because my family, I have family, like I said,
Uh,
my both of my parents were born in Detroit and they
mm-hmm.
come from pretty like rough areas in the city,
Mm-hmm.
and I've
Mm-hmm.
been there as a young person, and that's like it's predominantly black in some of these areas. So if a
Okay.
white person comes, depending on how they're dressed, I think we would stare and like, oh, this person obviously doesn't belong here. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because you're coming into our area where we, obviously have been segregated. Because I think, the whole notion of why ghettos exist is a systematic creation to, hold a
Right.
particular group of people down. So when
Right.
we're in our community and someone comes to our community that doesn't look like they belong there, of course people will stare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't think we would call the police. I mean, the police would
Right, and
rarely come
stare,
to
I
those
can,
part of the.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, now that we are here, so is it true that there are always this segregation between white and black neighborhoods, or how common is it to live together? I mean, in the
Yeah.
same, do people share same neighborhoods, or?
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on obviously your social economic status. If you're
Okay.
wealthy, of course you'll probably move to more wealthy areas, and I think there's more white people, and because
Mm-hmm.
they hold a huge amount of the huge percentage of the wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, in my neighborhood where I grew up, there was only two black families on the street that I lived. And so
Okay.
I think it's okay to move in. I mean, but I
Mm-hmm.
do think people subconsciously would say, oh, there's a black family moving in front of us. I mean, I've never spoken to a white person about this because I never felt like I needed to because I always moved where
Right.
my parents took me to. But I can imagine my
Mm-hmm.
parents, like when we moved around a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
they had that fear of like, okay, we're moving here and moving into their neighborhood and stuff like that. And because like I said, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, so I didn't really notice it because I mean, all the kids were my friends. I mean, we played and stuff. That's all I cared about. But my parents, adults in the situation, I can
Okay.
imagine they were, kind of, they had to be precarious about it.
Right. Okay. Do you think it's a possibility for blacks and whites in America to live harmoniously without any suspicion
I
about
do.
each other? And because I am asking, I've seen this. This is us again in the series. This is us. There's this interracial family.
Hmm.
So initially, Randall is adopted by a white family, and
Hmm.
and then also you see that one of the Hollywood star in the series, Randall's brother, white brother, Kevin, who
Hmm.
is acting as a Hollywood star, he dates a black woman in between. So that kind of showing, and then even in that they show there are some scenes which show how Kevin himself is ignorant of the subtle discrimination that his girlfriend faces. Like he will not be able to see it, he'll not be able to understand it. So so given all these situations, do you think it's a way forward in dealing with this, or is it even a possibility, or what's the situation like?
Well, I 100% agree. I'm an optimist. I mean, I understand, and I agree with this hope, and I do believe that Black people obviously can live harmoniously. I mean, it's just really sad when you think that we even have to ask this question because
That's so true. That's so true. Right.
I'm a Christian at the end of the day. I mean, I believe in God, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't nowhere in the Bible was it an abomination. Like, is it an abomination to
Mm-hmm.
be a person of color and be a Christian? So I think racism is it's a tool that has been created by people to segregate. I don't think God discriminates at all, and I think we can live in a world where we don't discriminate, but I think in this particular, I think now actually, and I'm shocked. When I saw the first time I saw the Amy Cooper video, as well as the horrible killing of George Floyd, I
Right.
was very upset, very upset, very upset. I mean, because it's been back to backs. It's like there has been
That's
4 or
true.
5 killings like in the past since last like November,
Right.
and I think that's contributing directly to like the anger that people have. But this time
Mhm.
around, I'm seeing more and more white people, more and more Asians, more and more, Latin Americans, South Asians, for example, like you reaching out to me and privately and
Right.
asking me how I'm doing and thinking of me. That
Right.
is, I feel like that fortifies my hope that we can come over this as a community. And there's a willingness to, but obviously you have someone like Donald Trump who
Right.
is in the White House basically spouting all
Right.
this horrible rhetoric and really saying ridiculous stuff that's not contributing to basically a brighter
Yeah.
America that we all want. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
what makes it difficult.
No, I think you're right. I mean, given when Donald Trump has won, and it was like an utter disappointment to people who, who believe in this idea of unity between all kinds of races, and the whole idea of the hatred and the
Mm-hmm.
white supremacy, and how you're using this fundamentalist or the like divisive politics, which we
Mm-hmm.
are seeing now coming in across almost all countries now are seeing this kind of a trend. I think it's a very sad trend. I mean, I don't know how to, how do we even take it in? I mean, there are people who are willing to work for it, but then when you also see a majority leaning or what do you say, reaffirming
Mm-hmm.
this racial discrimination or reaffirming divisive politics, supporting that it's
And then
unfortunate.
and
Yeah.
then at the same time, and I think it's crazy
Hmm.
because I think it's sad that we have to come to these circumstances where like I said this, and for the longest time I hated the movie Get Out because I really do it really does take the fact like take you having to manipulate people emotionally to see why racism is not okay, why idiosyncratic microaggressions are problematic. And then I really do think like watching that video and people saying how she is weaponizing her white privilege when he
Hmm.
basically all he was telling her was to obey the law. Like in Germany, she wouldn't know what to do because Germans will open their window and yell at you all the time if you cross the road without, waiting for the light. Like Germans
Right.
are very much
Okay.
by the book. So,
Hmm.
she could expect that if she were here in Germany. Someone would tell her, you need to leash your dog. People in Germany would do that. And
Right.
I'm thinking, would she come to this country and call the
Hmm.
police because someone or try to use her white privilege here in this predominantly white country to protect her? You know what I mean? I really do think it's sad how we have to you know, go
Right.
through like emotional manipulation or like what's it called? Like satiric manipulation, I think, for example, and
Right.
through
Right.
satire to get you to
Right.
see. And I think it's also a good conversation. The benefit of that is you have countries like New Zealand, right? New Zealand is a peaceful
Right.
country. And you have them marching on the streets, and you have like whites and blacks together on their knees, fists in the air, saying Black Lives Matter. I think this is beautiful because countries who are not as, the racism is
Right.
not as oppressive, I would say, in the United
Hmm.
States, have to also ask their question about how they are fundamentally racist. And I think this is a healthy conversation for all countries where the majority is like it's white, and then you also have people who are South Asian, who are Asian, you know what I mean, who are African, South American. You have to ask this question. I think privilege, this notion of privilege and making it a more accessible society, like this is gonna this, and I think this is the beauty of it. Like everybody is asking these questions. I think the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States is just as important to Black Brits,
Right.
French,
Totally.
German,
Totally.
Italian, New
Yes.
Zealanders as it is to Black Americans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. Right. Okay. Now that I also have one question, Chris, because you're also having a degree of Masters of Law.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think really there is a systematic discrimination or systematic bias in U.S. laws against blacks, or in the police, the way they deal with it? Is there a systematic bias? Well, we do agree at one point that in practice we're definitely seeing that what is happening, but
Mm-hmm.
by law what is the situation like?
Well, definitely I haven't studied U.S. law, so I
Okay,
can't
okay.
ask, I can't speak directly to, I mean, I studied U.S. immigration law, but I haven't studied U.S. law in terms of,
All
like,
right.
is
Okay.
this okay? But I do think if you look at, for example, in the
Mm-hmm.
States, like the
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd,
Right.
if the consequence of killing someone on your job, basically who is handcuffed face to the ground, like basically begging you to spare them from strangulation, if the consequence of that is
Absolutely.
paid leave, clearly there's
Mm-hmm.
something wrong with the system. You know what I
Definitely.
mean?
No, I mean,
It's
yeah, definitely. It's no, I read everywhere that it's a murder, it's a homicide, you know? I mean,
it's
when
ridiculous.
you
It's
yeah,
absolutely
it's
ridiculous. And I
right.
think and if you can get paid leave and you know it's not until you you have public like pressure that you go and arrest the murderer, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Then I do
Mm-hmm.
think that systematically the system doesn't cater to blacks.
Right, right.
Because I feel if a black police officer were to do that, then you know all hell would have broken loose. If it would have been like a white woman, for example, who had been like under the knee of a black man, you know,
Mm-hmm.
then I think yeah, it would be a completely different story. I think he would have been arrested immediately. It's just a different experience. I mean, we're all in the States. We all
Right.
have to go under the law, but I think in practice, clearly there's a disconnect.
So, okay, Chris, so let's just moving a little away from this particular topic and then we'll come back to it. But, and like we were talking about the identities, everything. So, in fact, the sexuality is another very interesting concept I would like to discuss with you
Hmm.
because identity in terms of sexuality and, you know, the ongoing LGBTQ movement, etc. So, now sitting here in India, I have not seen strong movement in this. I mean, I have seen some movements going on in the national capital in Delhi, and also in some pockets of the cities. There were movements asking to legalize, you know, LGBTQ communities, etc. But in terms of the acceptance in popular media or in terms of popular discussions among people, I do not think it has gained much of acceptance. It's still a foreign idea to people. It's sad that people think it's a foreign idea. And you know, there's not much of a discussion about this. So, in this regard, I would like to understand what is the situation in US like in terms of the discussions on sexuality and in terms of the popular acceptance acceptance in popular discourse among the people. What is it like?
So that's a good question. In 2014, I do believe that you know they had made an amendment to the Constitution, basically granting
Right.
same-sex couples the right to marry, and I was
Mhm.
very happy about that. But at the same time, I think basically, like you said, like you decriminalize it or you basically legalize it, but at the same time you know, in
Right.
practice, there still is discrimination. People still use the word fag, basically, or that's so gay. I mean, I feel like it's less and less that way
Mm-hmm.
now, but I do think we have a long way to come, and I do feel that there's a generational gap, and
Mm-hmm.
I think in the States we are becoming more comfortable with it, especially in
Mm-hmm.
big cities like San Francisco, you know, DC, Chicago. Basically, there's a huge presence of you know, of the gay community there. So I do
Right.
think in these cities are okay, but in my city, I still do
Mm-hmm.
think if you walk down the street with your boyfriend's hand or with your girlfriend's hand, depending on
Mm-hmm.
you know how you define yourself sexually, I do think
Right.
people would stare at you or may say something negative to you. But I do see there's a push, and I do appreciate this. I noticed this on Netflix. There are more queer, gay, black films or shows, basically,
Yes.
where like gays are the success story. And I do feel like
Right.
there's like systematic or like there's a cultural like
Mm-hmm.
progressive press to normalize it. So I do feel
Right.
that people are becoming more exposed to it. People are becoming more okay with it. And then, particularly during this time with Black Lives Matter, you know, like in
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump getting elected as president, I feel like we also have to see how he has directly discriminated against every single one of these communities, including, you know, women. And I
Mm-hmm.
still do feel like there's an active pushback. So I think this
Right.
pushback is also bringing about like cultural, what's it called, appropriation in a good sense to
Mm-hmm.
normalize gay culture in America.
Okay. Okay. So, like when you said discrimination, that people face, especially those from the LGBTQ communities. In what other subtle ways? One thing is the legally criminalizing them, etc. But then otherwise, in the popular discourse, what are the kind of ways in which they face the discrimination?
Wow. Well, I think, like I said, I think it varies. It depends on what city you come from. Me, I come
Okay.
from a very small, more or less conservative city in Michigan. So
Mm-hmm.
I think people would probably tell me like, you need Jesus, or you need Allah, or something like that, or like
Uh-huh.
they would probably, come up to you maybe and say like, oh, that's inappropriate. My kids are here, but
Right.
I think I can imagine this happening in the city that I'm from. But I do think so.
Okay.
There'll be a lot of people that would be like, "Yes, Queen, yes," or or something. Basically, really
Right.
chill and like live your best life. I support you. So I do think
Mm-hmm.
it's divided. But I think people now, it's getting to a point where people won't
Mm-hmm.
as proactively come up, because you see people now are standing up saying that's wrong. You don't have any right to come up to this person and tell them what are they to do. And I think like, check your privilege. Like, you have heterosexual privilege, if you think about it. Like, we say white privilege, we
Right.
also need to look at like the oppressive heterosexual, like, community that has, for example, why is it that gays
Mm-hmm.
always meet in like douche like areas where there's like music and
Right.
stuff and darkness? Is because for the longest time those are the only
Right.
places where we were able to congregate. And now,
Mm-hmm.
like, gay people are meeting in coffee, not to say that they never did meet in coffee shops, but it's like more of a thing. Like, we don't have to meet in the club to meet people or go on dates. Like, now we can go to coffee
Right.
shops, and I think it's becoming more normalized, so people are becoming more okay with that. So like, to bring it back to India, I
Mm-hmm.
think like, that has to happen too. I think that has to be like, I don't know exactly what it's like. I have never, when I was in India, I was quite reserved about it. When I
Right.
didn't, but yeah, I think
Right.
in big cities, if people go to, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can
Right.
speak more
No,
to
no,
that.
yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, I don't think people in most pockets are familiar even with this idea or have not come to terms with it. That's what I would like to think. I may be wrong. I love to be wrong on this, but I think that's how situation is. But anyway, I think in India I see little bit of effort in the popular media. Now there are
Hmm.
this movies, series coming up, touching upon these issues. And recently, I think you have also watched this movie, Shubh Mangal Jala
Yes.
Savardhan. It's otherwise or any movie or series touching upon any of these topics on sexuality would make it an intense, serious discussion. But rather, this Shubh Mangal Jala Savardhan was like just any other love story, and it was set up in a very fun, in a funny way, in the lighter moments, and it's the love is shown just like any other. I mean, they're just trying, but still, I
Which
do
is
not
good.
know how far. Yeah, yeah, which is very good. In fact, and there are some other series also on Amazon Prime, like Made in Heaven, Family Man. They're trying to touch upon it, but it's very, very less, because when I see any of the American shows, series or movies nowadays, I do find almost in every movie at least one character or the other, at one place or
Hmm.
the other, I'm finding it to be any of this LGBTQ.
Right.
In that sense, it's just becoming normal. You're normalizing the idea. People are familiar, and after a point, you do not think it is something that you do not know. You're very much familiar and comfortable with the idea, and I think that has to happen in Indian discussions also.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and 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 I think also, we also have to look back, and I always say this because I actually got into a huge debate with this woman from the UK when I was in Vietnam in 2017. She came up to
Mm-hmm.
me and we were talking about like Africa, and we were talking about places like India and Pakistan where basically they have laws that are
Mm-hmm.
really, really harmful to the gay community if you're caught in the act of gay sex or whatever. And I said,
Right.
well, hang on a second. Let's not, like, remember, as a colonizer, you
Mm-hmm.
know, these people, homosexuality, like, before we had encountered, for example, in Nigeria and in other countries,
Mm-hmm.
before we had encountered,
Mm-hmm.
British colonialism, it was
Mm-hmm.
very much okay in our society, for
Mm-hmm.
example, women to walk around
Mm-hmm.
like without shirts, as well as men, like, gay
Mm-hmm.
couples, like that was it wasn't uncommon. But obviously, when you bring religion, when you bring colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
um, you regulate. And I think it's inappropriate for someone who has, you know, decriminalized like gay sex or, you know, gay relations. I think it was in the 60s. I can't quote it 100%,
Right.
but
Okay.
you know, I think you have to look at the country's history. Nigeria is like only 50, 60 years old or something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
then, you know, so I think it's a process. So I think the way that India is doing it is
Mm-hmm.
slow, and I think it's good because you really can't come up to someone and throw it in their face and expect them to change. I think that will lead to violence. It's
Mm-hmm.
because people have to become more open-minded on their own terms, and I think you slowly normalize it, and I think people won't even ask that question anymore. And I think even I'm in a testimony because I feel like I had internalized
Mm-hmm.
like homophobia, and I'm someone who's homosexual, so I feel like I had
Mm-hmm.
to also come to terms with saying like, okay, I actually have the right to hold my partner's hand in public. I actually have the right to, you know, what is it, travel and book a hotel or, you know, or do whatever I want
Right.
like a normal couple would. So I feel like me even having to convince myself that, Chris, yes,
Mm-hmm.
although you have this right now, you also should tell yourself and convince yourself that you can practice it. You can get married. That exists for you now. Like, and I'm
Right.
also normalizing that myself. So I don't blame people from the community who are
Right.
not part of our community, because I feel like me too, I have to kind of like,
Come to
decolonize
terms.
my brain. Yeah. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. So, okay, so now this is where the question to the race and sexuality comes together. So, how do you think these two come together in determining everyday situations in America or outside America? And what are your experiences? Or so, how is it like in Germany or anywhere in Europe? And how are the situations different?
oh goodness, you are asking questions that are attacking my life. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding. No,
wow.
I'm kidding. No, your questions are really
Great.
good, and they're making me
Thank
think
you.
really
Thank
deep.
you.
I feel like there's some of these questions I haven't really touched on. So I do
Right.
think, and I'm happy to talk about them. So thank you. So
Thank you.
this question, I think it's really it's been an experience for me because
Mm-hmm.
uh, like I just feel like being black and being gay, you don't have a break. You can't get a break, especially if you're a man. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Right.
in our community, in our society, there's a definition. I think masculinity. Chimamanda Adichie, one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite authors from Nigeria, basically said this: we take men and we put them in very small boxes, and the box represents their masculinity. So in my community, you know, I think supremacy has made our success. If you play sports, if you have a bunch of women that you're hanging out with,
Mm-hmm.
there's drug influences and there's this aggressive attitude that comes with. And I think in many ways, that has defined our success in our own community. So when you don't identify with a lot of these factors, you are immediately gay, which is like, I hate to use this word, but it's like emasculating
Mm-hmm.
and then so in many ways, if you're in the black community and you are gay, you will become exorcised from the community. And then on the top of that, you have to deal with racism. So
Mm-hmm.
and then so it's like you're gay, you're black, you have to deal with these two things. And then for many ways that I found escape outside of the country. I found escape
Okay.
like in China, where like I was forced to deal with it because I was black and people would stare at me, and I was also gay and people would point their fingers at me. And
Right.
then coming back to the States, I don't know. I just feel like I had to go outside of my own country and redefine my own definition of the American dream and what it means to be successful. And now I feel that when I go back to the States, it's hard for someone to make me question if I have the right to exist or if I'm wrong, because I'm here in
Right.
Germany, and this is the first place I've ever been openly gay. Like, I have a partner here. We go out on the street, we hold hands, we do everything. It's totally fine, and I
Right.
learned that here in Germany.
Wow.
I don't. It's been a ride for me, and I
Right.
think that's one of the
Right.
reasons why I have a YouTube channel is because on my platform I kind of want to tell
Mm-hmm.
people who are of color back in the States, who are first generation college students, who are also queer, hey, it's okay, like to we can be a success story. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we're out
Right.
here, and
Right.
I wanna be that example for people like me.
Right. In fact, actually, my through movies, there's this series on Netflix called Sex Education.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've
I've
watched
seen
it.
it.
Yeah, and that the character in that series, the best friend,
Uh-huh.
a black, and also he's from
Yeah,
the
he's.
LGBTQ
Hmm.
community.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I forgot the character's name, but
I did too, but I know who you're talking about. He's
yeah,
fabulous.
so yeah, he is amazing. And I think for me, that was my a close interaction to understand. I mean, my only way of and understanding what it means and the kind of situations that the person had to go through. I mean,
Hmm.
it was
And you
yeah, it
can
was something
see.
I could never imagine, right?
Hmm. And
Yeah.
his and he and
So
he comes from. You can tell in the show he comes from a pretty conservative. I think he's Ugandan. I don't remember exactly what country
yeah,
he comes from in Africa.
yes, his
Hmm.
name is Gatwa, Nkuti Gatwa. His
Yeah,
he's playing the character
yeah,
of Eric. Yes, now I
yeah.
remember. Yeah,
So
yeah,
he had to deal with, I guess, racism in a predominantly white school, as well as being queer, and then
right,
being that part of his identity being unaccepted by his family, and also like his own identity
right,
of being like being feminine, effeminate, and then going to the school and like meandering that and having to put it on and take it off before he gets home. I think that was a perfect way to like
absolutely,
depict like the struggle. Like you put on this face when you go to school to be acceptable and to as a black person, and then maybe
right,
they are more receptive to your queer side. But when you
right,
go out, when you go home, you have
right,
to take that off because
right.
that's not acceptable at home. And I think
Mhm.
that's just a constant battle.
Right, right. Oh my God, I think we've had like, a wonderful discussion and a very intense and deep discussion
I
and
appreciate it. I love
and
this.
I hope, after some point of time, these shouldn't be even the topics that somebody need to be talking about. I mean, it should become so
Hmm.
normal and, we
Yep.
have a lot more things to deal with. And the last thing that should be worried and we should worry or should be bothering anybody are the identities.
Exactly.
Any types of identities, that should be the
Hmm.
last concern. I just hope one day, we'll see such a world.
I do too. I have hope, and I
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
believe there. I believe we'll get there.
In fact, I would like to quote one of my most favorite quotes, the dialogues from the movie Shawshank Redemption. Remember, right? Hope is a good thing.
Hmm.
Maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. So I think
Yes.
that's the best way to move forward.
Yes, I
And
agree with you.
yeah, and thank you so much, Chris. I mean, thank you so much for sharing a lot of your experiences and making us understand and see much more closely what things are like in America and outside America. And I
Well,
hope you,
thank you so much
yeah,
for having
yeah,
me.
yeah, and I
And I
hope you have a great stay at Germany and
thank
enjoy
you.
it.
And I
Yeah.
really appreciate your you reaching out to me and also that just makes me feel really good. So thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
can speak. I think I can speak for my community to say that like the collect you may not be able to understand 100%, but like the
Right.
proactivity of wanting to understand and embracing us really means a lot. So thank you so much, my
Thank
sister.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank.
Thank you very much for everybody for tuning into Radio Sofia, and we'll meet with another session very soon. Bye bye.
Bye.